Welcome to the More TV Vicar podcast with me, Wayne Massey, and this person is called James Stevenson.
Hi.
James has been away for a while, but actually you wouldn't have noticed because I haven't recorded podcasts while you've been off, although I have recorded a couple. So this is part of a mini series that we're putting together on just kind of ministry in other places, and I kind of sort of principally in the kind of places that we either don't know a lot about or make assumptions about. So I recorded a couple of interviews with an amazing couple called Jed and Nicole who work in Israel with anybody and everybody who wants to give their life to Jesus. And they were amazing conversations, not about politics or about theology, but about what it means to hear God's call and what it means to have a soft heart. And James, you're interview number 3. You have been off a few months on a sabbatical.
Yes.
But as part of that, you spent some time with the South Sudanese church.
Yes.
So tell us, what's the question? Tell us where you went, who to, and as best as you can, a little bit about their context and their situation that's so different from ours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you, Wayne. So just over 2 weeks ago, I got back from a 10-day trip to East Africa. So I went with an organisation called SOMA. You're a trustee of SOMA, so Sharing in Ministries Abroad. It's an organisation that seeks to connect different parts of the Anglican Communion and essentially be a nervous system for the ministry of the Spirit. So sharing the ministry of the Spirit from, I think there was a trip that went to the Arctic in February.
There was a trip that went to the Inuit people.
Yeah,
that was. I was like, that would be. I wouldn't get a good suntan.
Through to Richard, the lead, going to India just before we went to South Sudan. So I know Richard through you, and they're a partner in mission of B&A. And I said to Richard, I think during my sabbatical, I'd like to go to South Sudan. And Richard knew of a place that was looking to receive a mission, and so we assembled a team of 6, and it's to a place called Morabo, which is just on the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan, and in that kind of corner, in the bottom left-hand corner of South Sudan, near Uganda. So we were preparing for that team of 6, and then about 3 weeks before we went, we discovered that there was some quite significant security concerns around the road from Uganda into South Sudan, and we spoke with various kind of professionals who've got expertise in that area, and the net result was that we decided to reduce the team from 6 to 2, and then we, the bishop who was receiving us in Morabo, contacted a friend of his who's in northern Uganda and said, would you like to receive a team? So we ended up running 2 parallel conferences, either side of the South Sudanese border, one in South Sudan, which I led with a friend called Jonathan, who's a pilot with British Airways, and then Rob, my next door neighbour, who's a member of Emmanuel Bristol, led a team of 4 in 3 others, 2 Kenyans and Ordnan from the UK in Koboko, about 20 miles from the border.
Now,
sorry,
that's really good.
Background.
I'm guessing that the chances of there being somebody listening to this who is really bang up to date on Sudanese into South Sudanese politics, and therefore then building on that, the state of the church in South Sudan is probably quite low. So assuming that, James, tell us about the country and the church, and kind of what it's like to be a Christian in South Sudan at the moment.
So South Sudan is distinct from Sudan, where there's a civil war going on and has been for the last 2-3 years. And when the British Empire was in that part of the world, Khartoum in Sudan was the capital, and the British Empire kind of ruled that northern part of Sudan, and essentially they left the southern part of Sudan to the missionaries. It was the kind of the swamplands of the Nile. It was harsh territory that they left to missionaries, and then when the British Empire left, the civil war began, and there were 2 phases of multiple decade civil wars in the second part of the 20th century between the Arab north and the black, increasingly Christian south. but it was more subtle than that. It wasn't just North versus South. There are 64 tribes in the South, and they were often pitted against each other by the Northern government kind of arming them against each other. So you got this kind of revival of faith, the East African revival, spilling into an area that is becoming increasingly dangerous and hostile, and amazing stories of huge numbers of people. One bishop who I met confirming 160,000 people in 1 year, but yet also this kind of deep divisions going on. And when South Sudan becomes independent, it very swiftly falls into civil war, leaders pitted against each other, and it becomes very dangerous. And the part that we were traveling to has 300 rebel soldiers 20 miles up the road who are in support of the first Vice President, Riek Machar, who's just been put in prison 6 months ago by the President, Salva Kiir. So there's all this hostility, but yet the church has been growing in the midst of that. They have this phrase that in the South Sudanese church that's been around for a few decades called "death has come to reveal the faith." So it's almost like actually the sheer horror of death in war for decades highlights the need for faith in Jesus. So,
and it's also worth saying, I've never been to South Sudan, but I mean, you landed in Entebbe.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if it's... Is the new airport terminal open yet?
I don't know, but it's nice. Yeah.
So but you landed on Entebbe where, you got your 5G, you got your tarmac roads.
Yeah.
They're building a new airport.
Yeah.
South Sudan is very, very different.
Yeah, so I took a photograph from the border, and on the Ugandan side, it's tarmac. And on the South Sudanese side, there's not a bit of tarmac in sight.
Yeah.
And all the shops that were built kind of 15 years ago have been left empty, and so you've got kind of trees and bushes growing up in amongst buildings, and you can just see the effects of the civil war that's been running there on and off. In that part for the last kind of 13 years. The guy who interpreted for me at the conference lives in a refugee camp in northern Uganda with his family, and he's got 5 children, and he owns a house just over the border into South Sudan, and he hasn't lived there for 10 years, and it's currently overgrown. So he had to kind of cut his way through bushes in order to get to the home that he owns, that he can't live in because there's no healthcare, there's no education facilities that would enable him to move back with his family. So we travelled 20 miles to get to the place where we were doing the conference. It could have been dangerous. There'd been ambushes along that road. But we got there safely. But there was no healthcare when we were there. There was an American missionary across the road who was a nurse, but there was no kind of hospital. The cathedral has a school that has 600 pupils in it, and 3 teachers and 3 supporters. There's no. If you get sick, there's no way of getting help, except either going to the witch doctor or turning up at church.
Yeah. And that's the so actually Soma, who you went with, really, really committed to the church in South Sudan for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is that the starkness of life in South Sudan, even compared to just DRC is a bit different, but like just south of the border, Uganda, and then if you go further south again, Rwanda, which is like probably one of the most Western countries in East Africa now in terms of, the same place in Rwanda will have 5G, will have a medical center with a drone dropping medical supplies every day, and yet you're just one country away. Yeah,
and the soil is no different. Yeah. So actually the living from the land, and even the language and the people either side of the border, it's no different. Yep. The only difference is that there's peace on one side and there's not on the other.
So in that part of Africa, the thing that makes a difference in terms of the two, the thing that makes a difference in terms of the soil is, are you sub-Saharan or not? And you're sub-Saharan there. Yeah. So you're actually in an area that's quite fertile and with the right. And so what creates the circumstances is the leadership. Yeah. And interesting enough, we've talked about this before. Sometimes you can have a place that looks really good and flying, but the leadership is quite despotic. Yeah. But yeah, and so it's quite a fragile place. What as a Western church leader, And now you've been to South Sudan before, but not for many years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But as a Western church leader going in, thinking about, doing ministry, we're sat in our church building here. What assumptions, coming back, what assumptions are you now aware of that you carried into that environment about church here in the West or church there that kind of like have been challenged?
Yeah, so I think the presumption is that in a place where there has been revival, that the gospel is something that people have held on to. So it was quickly apparent that our suspicions that people might have jumped into legalism were well-founded, and that people were presenting. I was talking to you earlier. Very quickly, we had to work out how to present Tim Keller's Mountain. That he puts his antinomianism on one side and legalism on the other, and Jesus at the top.
And if you're listening, you don't go. You don't know what those words meant. James is now going to explain it in a much better way.
that actually, on one side of a mountain that we can slide down is Jesus and my work. So I hear the gospel, and I attempt to respond to it with my works and my righteousness. And Paul says to the Galatians, why are you finishing in the flesh what's been started in the spirit? Which is...
Well, it's a brilliant image. He says, you were running a good race. Who cut in on you?
Yeah.
It's a great phrase.
And then we can slide down that side or slide down the other side, which is that actually Jesus has done this and I don't need to respond because his grace is amazing and I don't actually have to do anything. He's rescued me from it. So there are no consequences for how I behave because I've been saved. So there's no need for sanctification.
The Corinthians are probably the closest ones to
that.
Yeah.
And actually the reality is that people can slide down one side and then they get so exhausted they swing back to the other, or they can slide, so they slide down the my work and then they swing to the other side, which is I can't do it anyway. Yeah. Or they slide down the it doesn't matter and then they go, oh, I need to do something, and they go to the other. But at the top is Jesus and his work in me.
Yeah.
It's Jesus and it's his work in me. It's his kingdom drawing near, his will being done in my life. I have been crucified with Christ, and the life I live is him in me. I no longer live, but he lives in me. And it was recognizing that actually, even though there's a church that has been growing and thriving in the context of great pain, suffering, and evil, actually there was a forgetting of the gospel and a need to recalibrate people's understanding of who Jesus is and what his gospel means for us.
Yeah, so it's there is the danger in those kind of environments, and I'm saying this about anywhere where because of revival to be a Christian becomes the norm, that the church can end up being a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's that's what the West was like once upon a time. Possibly what bits of South America, like Latin America, and bits of Africa, and that's but as you go on, in the West currently we're an inch wide and an inch deep. Okay, so that's assumption number one, which is actually I'm turning up somewhere where there's been revival. They're all going to know Jesus really well, and I'm going to be learning from them. And you get and you realise, oh, actually they've got their stuff. Any other assumptions?
I think because I've been, on 5 or 6 trips to East Africa, I know pretty well that the danger is assumptions, and as Stanley House would say, you don't know what to do until you know what's going on, and so I think you just learn to read the room pretty quickly. So the bishop had invited us to do some trauma healing, and I worked out fairly early on that what he might mean by trauma healing and what I might mean by trauma healing could be two different things, and so it wasn't a conversation we could have over the phone, but on the first morning, just having a conversation with him and saying, okay, so when you say this, what do you mean? And realizing that from his perspective, he was wanting the same thing, but underneath it, he understood that there was a fundamental shift that needed to happen in people's identity. And he could see that his people didn't understand what it meant to be children of God and to live out of that identity. So rather than kind of starting with that as okay, you will get this, now we need to take you on the journey of what it means to bring our pain to God, actually we had to go back a few steps and say, right, what does it mean for us to be children of God and to understand God as our Father?
This is, I think it's the outsider. So we have the experience here. So when we bring in guest speakers from outside, they speak in kind of prophetically, and they also say stuff to us. They even just spot in a day with us that we don't spot ourselves. And actually, the gift of church family is that we're not outsiders because we're all family, but outsiders in the sense that when you step in, the Lord, you in coming in without the baggage and and without the culture of the place, see things differently. And then the Lord speaks through that. I think it's the closest what you went through is the closest to imagine Paul as he turns up in the different cities going, the idol of this city is.
Yeah.
So like thinking about like when he gets to Ephesus, he's a completely mad miracle worker because that's what Ephesus needs. When he gets to Athens, it's all rhetoric and intellect. And it is a sense of actually, this is what the Lord wants to do in this place. So I think that's part of what you were experiencing.
Yeah, and it was a privilege to be there. And we kind of taught our way through a course that Soma had been running 20 years ago.
So tell us about that. So you get there, you've got this conference.
Yeah.
There's 2 of you now, not 6 of you.
Yeah.
And what do you end up teaching? What does the Lord end up doing through that?
So it's an old Soma course that came out of some of the stuff that was written by African mission agencies, or African-based mission agencies after the Rwandan genocide about healing of trauma and the journey from that to forgiveness and reconciliation. And I'd seen that taught when I was in South Sudan in 2004 with my old boss, Andy Wheeler, who'd been a missionary in that part of the world for 25 years. And so we kind of modified that slightly and took people through what it means to be a child of God, what it means to be aware that we are made in the image of God, but we are also sinful, what it means to bring our laments to a good God, and then what it means to bring our laments to a God who himself suffered. And all of that was done within the kind of the aim of, and we talked about this a lot, about being good soil. That actually, if the danger is if we turn the heat up on the ministry of the Spirit and we haven't dealt with the stuff that's underneath, we haven't dealt with our pain, then what's going to end up happening is we're going to end up bringing the ministry of the gospel to people, and instead of it being done in love, it's being done in pain. So really 1 Corinthians 13 kind of sat all the way through that actually if I speak in the tongue of men and angels but have not love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And what began to happen through the week was that those who were weak and were able to understand their pain, their emotional pain and the trauma early, were able to experience the healing work of the Spirit that then enabled them to be safe people to then participate in prayer ministry through the week.
Okay. So you teach about good soil.
Yeah.
But you've done Keller's Mountain. So you've got like, it could be Jesus and me. It could be just, like Jesus and it doesn't matter. Or it could be Jesus and his work. If I'm thinking about the stuff in my life and wanting to become good soil, because I think taps into all of our felt needs. We all want to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
What did you discover while you were out there about how I pursue becoming good soil without it becoming a legalistic thing?
Yeah.
I've got to remove all these rocks, or Jesus isn't going to work in me. Or I've got to remove all these rocks so I can say to Jesus, now look at me, I'm good soil. Or how do I do it in such a way that I'm not just going, right, well, there are these rocks in my life, Jesus, you just sort them out. How do I get to the middle bit where I'm letting Jesus do the work? I'm partnering with Jesus to do the work without it being legalistic or
so they have this
OTT. I don't need to do anything.
They have this.
Have I made sense?
Yeah, you have. They have this thing where when they worship, they will kind of stand and they'll shake each other's hands and they'll kind of bop up and down, and it's clear that that's their way of saying we're agreed that we're happy to be here together.
Yeah.
And we did this thing where we said to them, well, when you do that, can you use the other hand to point upwards to say actually we're agreeing that we're children of God.
Okay.
And we're happy to be here. And then when we got them to respond, instead of just putting their hand up, as we might ask people to, kind of with their palm, if you're just listening to this, palm pointing towards the teacher, we got them to clench their fist and to raise their hand up, because often when they really agreed, they would hold each other by the inside of their elbows.
Yes.
And that was a way of saying, yes, we really agree. And so we were saying, can you point your fist up to the skies and imagine God holding the inside of your elbow from the heavens, and as if you're saying, actually, yes, I really agree with this. And so just the foundation of actually what it means to know that we're children and we're loved, and there's nothing that we can do that can separate us from God's love. And that in the security of that, we can then come to him and we can acknowledge both our sin and our sorrow, and we can allow him to show us how he has dealt with those things at the cross, and how His Spirit wants to cleanse us of those things and renew us. So that actually we're just repenting of our sin, and we're lamenting our sorrows to Him, and that as we do that, we're trusting that He makes us good soil, and that's His work in us. So it's not us doing it; it's us saying, actually, at the cross, you have taken up our sorrows, and you've paid the penalty of our sins, and so we are not the ones to deal with those things, but He is the one who has dealt and will continue to deal with those things in our lives.
I'm going to ask some questions about stories, but two things as you were speaking that kind of jumped out at me are about the nature of what it is to be human and how we are. Is number one is how the joy, and this is going to quick apologetics thing. This is Christianity is so different to Islam.
Yeah.
Is that the gospel finds its way into every culture within that culture.
Yeah.
So, for example, the idea of us all standing here and shaking our fists as a response, because in our country, the closed fist means something else.
Yeah.
And we don't have, actually, like in Rwanda, they do the same. You shake hands and hold the elbow at the same time.
Yeah.
It's kind of so the idea of them doing a physical move that they can picture being actually quite a close embrace because God's holding my elbow means raising your hands and shaking your fist to the heavens is an appropriate thing.
Yes.
Whereas you would go, like, if I said, oh, if you want to respond to God now, raise your hands and shake your fist to the heavens. Doesn't, No. And so there's that bit where actually, and that's back to Paul as he travels around, is that actually Jesus lands in every culture and affirms, we've talked about this in other podcasts, just affirms ethnic differences and how we are wired slightly differently, and the gospel lands itself and finds its way into that culture in ways that are appropriate. But secondly, whilst we're also very different, we're also very the same. So you and I both had experiences of this where we've been to that part of the world and we've met with people who have had deep, deep trauma. And when you first meet them, there's a bounce and there's a joy and there's a smile. And it's not that that's not real, but it is masking a whole load of pain, which most of us in the West couldn't even get anywhere near.
Yeah.
A whole load of pain that still needs to be resolved. And that's where we are the same, because actually the stuff that stops us being good soil is the stuff that's kind of like, that is buried. And it's everything from rocks to packets of crisps to bits of string and everything else. And it's all the stuff of life. And what we try and do in all cultures is cover it up and say maybe it doesn't matter. But the Lord in His kindness is wanting to remove all of that stuff so that we can be good soil.
Yes.
As that is going on, so you're teaching this, and what are you seeing happening in the room and in the conference and the people across the week?
He chooses the weak things to shame the strong.
Go on.
That actually the Mothers Union represented about 25% of the people there, and would be hierarchically presumed to be the least amongst them. And yet they were the ones who understood the concept of being real about pain. And very early on, they were the ones who responded to the offers for prayer and responded to the call to repentance and to being filled with the Holy Spirit, to the point where when we began to teach about the gifts of the Spirit on the fourth day, God actually saw fit to move powerfully amongst them, and as a way of saying actually they were good soil. They were good. They were good stewards of what He wanted to do, and we began to see people testifying to healing. It's always difficult to know because you're working through a language barrier as well as a power dynamic.
Yes.
So I'm cautious to talk about numbers, but we heard people. We heard a lot of people from within the Mothers Union testifying to physical healing. But more important than that was that as that was happening, I was able to have a conversation with the Mothers Union leaders about how to steward that and how to help those who were not experiencing healing or had experienced it but might not experienced it continually, and how to bless those who were experiencing it, and essentially how to steward that ministry, knowing that actually they were good soil, and they wanted to continue being good soil, so that actually healing might continue to be released within not just the Mothers Union there, but within the diocese.
And one of the ways I think you can kind of spot if it's the Lord, tell the story about the lady with the shoulder, because that's not one that was happening in front of everybody else or whatever, and was kind of reported.
Yeah.
Later, so that's
we taught about the gifts of the Spirit, and a few people had come forward to receive, and it was one of those kind of, yeah, that's nice, but I'm not really sure what's happened moments. And Jonathan, my traveling companion, who was a Jonathan, he was a brilliant friend to be with, and he just said, I'm contending for more, and so we went back in and we sat with some of the Mothers Union just to say, what was going on, and one of them was able to testify that morning she hadn't been able to carry water. In fact, for the previous few days, she hadn't been able to carry water above her head in the way that they would from the well to the Mothers Union hut, and her shoulder was in so much pain. And then she said that afternoon when we prayed for people to be filled with the Holy Spirit, she'd been healed and she was able to move her shoulder around completely. And that was really encouraging. And then we were with a group of about 8 or 9 of them, and inevitably you then say, well, is there anyone else here who needs healing? Because it kind of gives you faith to pray for more. And 4 more experienced or testified to experiencing healing. And there's that moment where one of them says, I can't see past you, and I'm sitting about 3 meters away from her, and I'm thinking, okay, Lord, I've seen you heal shoulders and knees and joints, but not eyes. So this is like, we're over to you. And her and another were able to testify that they could see further than they had been able to see when they came. I don't know what that means, but I know that then the next day, when I invited those people who had experienced healing,
you said, you said, could the 5 come?
So at the end of praying for them, I said to them, you know how to do this now. This is Jesus. We're just loving people by praying for them in their pain, and sometimes he heals them, and sometimes he doesn't, and we don't understand. So when you go back to the Mothers Union hut tonight, why don't you just ask other people? And so the next morning when we started, I invited the 5 who had experienced healing to come forward, and another 5 came with them.
Brilliant.
who were testifying to being healed that night when the Mothers Union prayed for them, and then some more were able to testify to that. And we honoured those who had received prayer for healing but hadn't experienced healing, because we cannot have a theology of healing without a theology of suffering. The two are part of what it means for us to live between the cross and the return of Jesus, and we know that this is true.
And that is if there's something that we still need to learn from the African church, is that actually they do still carry that theology of suffering, and of perseverance in hard times, and actually of living in fragile times. So like your team in Uganda, they're in a country that seems to be far more sorted than South Sudan, but there were elections earlier in the year and everybody was petrified about what would happen because the whole thing is fragile. So that's something we can learn from them, that actually God's power moves in weakness but also moves alongside the stuff of this life. What I'm hearing, James, is we start with the heart, and we start with the reality of the situation and lament and teaching about the goodness of God, and then after that he begins to move in power, and it's not because everybody's doing the right thing so they can move in power. It's basically so that people are, I think the only qualification for a work of the Lord in your heart is hunger. And so what's happening is, what I'm hearing you saying is that the hungry for handing over their pain and their difficulties to him begin to see him move. But then at some point you have to leave. Tell us about what you've heard has happened since you left. Well, actually, your last Sunday and then the ones that have followed.
Yeah, so on the last Sunday, they had the young adults service at 6:30 in the morning.
The young adults, actually, I've not been to South Sudan. Are the young adults as old in South Sudan as they are in other countries?
No, it's like 30 and below, and they're all dressed to the nines. And the bishop starts the service early because he's desperate to get us back into Uganda before it gets dark. So the service actually starts at 6:20. Funnily enough, I mean, I've experienced this when I've been to church elsewhere on my sabbatical, people don't turn up on time. It's not just B&A. So, half an hour after we've started at the unofficial start time, there's about 100 people there, and a bunch of them want to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And then at 9 o'clock, there's a service in the local language. So the youth service happens in English. There's a local language service at 9 o'clock, and it's brilliant and a kind of chaotic and wild in worship, and yet ordered in terms of where people are sitting, with lots of robes at the front and less robes at the back. And but then we asked for people to come forward and receive prayer if they want to become a Christian, and a few hands had gone up, but more people came forward, and yeah, so that was really good. And then the following Sunday, they had more people. So the bishop preached, and they had a bunch of people come forward and say they wanted to become a Christian, a bunch of people wanting to be filled with the Holy Spirit. But what's also really, I think probably the most exciting thing is the bishop is amazing, and he's one of those people who gets that the solution for his area is not that the rebel soldiers leave, it's that they come to know Jesus and they experience forgiveness and reconciliation.
It's worth saying about when you meet bishops from these parts of the world, so there are people like you and me who, like those of us who are Church of England ministers, it's generally like you could say it's because we probably couldn't hack it in the real world. Whereas actually when you meet a bishop in Africa, you're looking at somebody who probably could be running the country if they hadn't been called by... There are some incredibly... impressive. I mean, lots of the bishops in Africa have doctorates. I mean, it's just these are men and women who have then chosen to sacrifice what could have been quite a worldly career if they wanted to go and serve, quite often the least and the lost.
So Bishop,
they're amazing.
Bishop Data was ambushed on the same road that we travelled. He pointed out the place where he was ambushed by one set of rebel soldiers 2.5 years ago. After that happened, against other people's advice, he contacted the leader of those rebels and then went to see them. Because his conviction is, well, the only way this gets solved is if they come to know Jesus and they experience the call to forgiveness and reconciliation. And we were praying together about lots of things we prayed about. There's witchcraft in that part of the world, and that definitely sharpens your understanding of the ministry of the Spirit. Because if people don't have a doctor and they have a witchcraft, then the church has got to hold power, but has got to do it safely. But then we prayed about the other rebel soldiers. So there's two groups, and there's 300 rebel soldiers about 20 miles up the road. And we heard just last Friday and Saturday that the bishop went to see them, and they've had 100 requests for Bibles
from the rebels.
That's
amazing.
In different languages for personal study and fellowship, that's the prayer for that part of the world, is that Jesus moves amongst those who might call themselves Christians nominally, but haven't had a kind of a deep conversion. And when you see someone like the bishop who's utterly convinced about the power of Jesus to change his nation, it's very compelling.
Just thinking, I'm just going to I've got to land this in a second, but the same. Just as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about like how the Lord operates in different situations. I've been thinking about Ezekiel quite a lot because we're going to start teaching through Ezekiel. And actually, one of the hard things to hear in Ezekiel is some of what the Lord is doing is for his name, his fame, and his glory, which we don't like to hear in the West. And actually, for his name, his fame, and his glory, the Lord operates in different cultures in different ways so that people come to Jesus. So if you are in a culture like you have been in, where there isn't a lot of medical health care, and where there are witch doctors and demons using the witch doctors to bring a level of healing, you would then expect the kingdom to be breaking through in power, because the Lord, and this is what Paul gets to Ephesus, and it's basically, he's like a Pentecostal. For a few, he's like, where's Paul's hanky? Let's go and, And the thing I love about that Ephesus bit is it's not a hanky that they've anointed or set aside. It's basically something I imagine him like doing some tent making, putting down a piece of cloth and somebody grabbing it and running off with it and laying it on sick people. And yet, but we're not told that about Paul elsewhere. And so in the same way that, and we do believe that God heals, but actually his kingdom will break through here in our bit of Bristol in the way that is a clear and obvious demonstration of his power that the hearts that don't yet know Jesus need to hear. And so our assumptions are always that either where we've seen it move before, or how we've seen him move in other cultures, therefore that's what it should look like now. Whereas he's always going, actually, do you trust me that I'm going to break out in the way that your culture, your city needs, so that Jesus' name is lifted high?
Yes. So
That's a challenge for church leaders because we have ideas of what it should look like.
and then it comes down to actually the biggest thing for me, I think, at a personal level was, am I going in fear or am I going in love? So the idea of traveling on that road was quite fearful at some time, but somebody spoke into my life and sent me Psalm 121 prophetically, where it says he will keep you from all harm, and it's the only trip I've been into Africa where I haven't even had a mosquito bite. So
if you don't know what James looks like, he looks like he's ripe for the mosquito.
I am. And so he was true to his word. But I felt a conviction, actually, James, are you going to go in fear or are you going to go in love? Because it can't be both. Because there's no fear in love. And that kept coming back to me. And at the moment where the woman from the Mothers Union said to me, I can't see, there was a fear inside me that I had to confess to God. Firstly, if I pray and she isn't healed, is that a lack of faith on my part? Mm-hmm. If I pray and she is healed, what will that do to my theology? And what will that do to me when I go back to Bristol?
Yeah.
And I had to let go of those fears and say, the loving thing to do is to sit with this woman who cannot see past me and ask that God will bring healing to her eyes.
Yeah.
And leave it up to him. Which then means that when I come back to a different context, I'm not thinking, well, now God has downloaded to me the gift of being able to pray for people's eyes to be partially healed. Actually, the gift that he's given me in that moment is being able to love somebody and not be fearful of what they're asking of me. And so what I want to bring, and what we bring, I think what enables the gospel to travel across all of those different contexts is the love that enables us to connect with people who don't know that love.
Brilliant. James, thank you very much.